3, 2, 1. Kristy-Leigh Minehan, thank you for coming out to Crypto Grownups.
Thank you for having me.
This is going to be a very special episode. First of all, this is the first one I'm doing from Greece. I've been on hiatus for the last week. So, yeah, have you ever been to Greece?
Wow. I have once for a conference. Did you just move there to live or?
I did. I'm permanently going to be based here, as strong as permanent can possibly be in this world.
Wow. What brought you there? Work, food,
I mean,
love?
I'm Greek. Yeah, the plenty of.
There we go.
But yeah, I'm Greek, so it made sense. And this could be a big episode, not only because of that, because we're going to be talking about ProgPow and all the things that come with it, which, you know, the non-technicals I think are the most interesting really right now, because there's so much about IP, governance, FUD. There's just a lot of interesting stuff to get your insights into. And really, congratulations on being part of this, because it's a big part of history. I mean, this is going to go down as one of those big discussions in my opinion.
I wouldn't give me congratulations just yet. It's ProgPow was probably the worst mistake I've ever made in my life.
Oh, wow. So you've already got a regret on it.
I do. Bob Somerville went and stirred up a bunch of journalists, and they started harassing our customers, our clients, our friends when I was still CTO of Core Scientific. No one likes journalists. Like, no one likes paparazzi. It's incredibly annoying. And there's been a lot of nonsensical conspiracy theories all stemming from this algorithm. And it's absolutely bizarre, because when you strip it away at its root, it's just a few lines of code that were written to just tweak at hash to ensure that it was, it fully saturated a GPU, which means that it's a lot harder to make an ASIC for. It wasn't some grand conspiracy theory of, oh my God, let's go and, you know, favor one GPU card or another. And I guess we made the unfortunate mistake of ever getting GPU manufacturers to consult or audit on the code, because that just spun down a whole other nightmare and a whole other conspiracy theory. Though I have to say, on the other hand, I kind of feel like the Lex Luthor of crypto right now. So that's pretty cool.
Oh my God. You got to stop bringing up villains and bad people from history, Kristy. It's not helping you. Don't compare
it's
yourself
helping
to
me
Lex
wonderfully.
Luthor. Don't compare yourself to Lex Luthor. Oh my God, that's horrible. Don't say that. No. So, I mean, you've learned that EIP authorship is a lot more than just coming up with an idea, right? There's what else is involved? You know, tell us more about the stewardship layer that you're now getting accustomed to.
So, well, actually, I'm not the champion for the EIP. So that's a guy called Deno Theron. I think he recently joined Pegasus. So he's actually been the champion of the EIP, and that was done because at the time I was at Core Scientific, so I wasn't actually able to represent or do any of the standard, you know, processes with the EIP. What we did learn, though, is when ProgPow was originally proposed, and I haven't released this or told anyone publicly yet, so this is a first sneak peek. I sent a tweet to Vlad Zamfir, because back in the day, I still thought, oh my God, Ethereum, if you want to get, you know, if you want to share an idea or get anything put on the core devs call, you go straight to Vitalik and Vlad. And in my mind, you know, Vitalik was CEO and Vlad was CTO. That's just how it worked. Because when you're involved on the mining side of things, as much as I was, you don't really pay attention much to the governance process. So I sent a tweet to, a DM to Vlad Zamfir, and that was back in March of 2018. I was like, Vlad, we did this really cool thing. We tweaked the proof of work algorithm. And this was at the time when the E3 was starting to come out, and Ethereum was actually looking at a proof of work change because of the impending ASICs that had just been released, and they had to make a decision. They were like, great, you know, that's a really great idea. I sent the white paper to Vlad, and he's like, no, that's not how this works. You need to go put an EIP and share it with the community. I'm like, what the fuck? So sent that to, getting the EIP was actually incredibly difficult. So it's not like most people think, oh, you just, whip up your idea. No, there's a format that has to be rigorously followed and a standards. And when you're proposing an algorithm, a lot of documentation and reasoning and rationale needs to go in, and things that you might think are obvious to you as a programmer aren't always obvious to other people, especially when you're dealing with cryptography and hardware and software. So you have to dumb down everything about 5 levels and the goal of the EIP is to ensure, anyone that has just a standard programming background can take this EIP and it becomes the blueprint for implementing this change into their chosen client. And was a lot of work. And that was pretty interesting to learn. And then what I learned is that the next thing Vlad told me was, hey, you have to go get community support for the EIP. And I'm like, what the fuck does that mean? And he's like, well, you need to maybe make some Reddit posts, make some social media posts, and start talking about why you believe this is important. And so I never realized that EIPs were so community-based. I had always thought that it was more the core devs made decisions, since they, at the end of the day, are implementing changes into the client. The reason why is because when it's community-based, it can be heavily gamed, both positively and negatively. So how do you define what is community? Do you just do it by the loudest voice? Because faking the loudest voice in the age of internet is very easy. And you can, the one thing I've learned now from the ProgPow debacle is that it's very easy to spin up a ton of bots. We've had so many fake accounts that just swarm Twitter or Discord, just pushing their agendas, both positive and negative. So it's not one party to blame, and it's horrible. You've got a ton of people that are faking documents to push their agendas as well, which is also incredibly frustrating. And so governance right now in crypto is heavily digital based, and that's not great. When you're in the digital world, you have way more attack surfaces than if you were in the physical world. That's one of the reasons proof of work works, because you're tying your attack to both a physical resource, a physical cost, and an operational cost. Whereas in proof of stake, once you're in the digital realm, your attack surface is just a lot larger. So
now
it's been a learning.
So, that a lot of people don't realize how much goes into these EIPs or any of these improvement proposals. The fact that you have to do a lot more on the community side than actually just, ideating your improvement. And Farron, you mentioned, is the author, but I feel like you've had a lot more visibility connected to this. Is that fair?
Farron isn't the author, he's the champion. So what that means is someone has to take the EIP through the process and basically represent it in calls and represent it through, some of the core dev pieces. And it can either be the EIP author, or you can nominate someone to be the champion.
Okay, but has he had similar amount of exposure and community discussion as you have right now? Because I always find your name mentioned. Is there a particular reason why it's you and not him?
Probably because there are still a lot of questions that can't be answered. So the thing with ProgPow is that you need the hardware engineering background. A lot of the questions that stem from
and that's why you're involved?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So my background is in crypto mining, has been for the last 10 years, and it's just been hardcore data centers, building out mining farms. Sorry for the noise in the background. That's my birds. So it's been hardcore mining, hardcore cryptocurrency, building data centers, building GPU rigs, ASIC devices, and designing FPGA bit streams.
So really more on that side. You're being brought in to the forefront is because you're still the only person that can really answer a lot of the concerns around the 30 lines of code.
So in the early days, both Def and Else were on a lot of the core dev calls, and they helped out a ton with Def especially. He's really good at the game theory and the economics piece, and that's really the stuff that he can speak to. Unfortunately, watching the way this has gone down, no one wants to touch ProgPow anymore. Like the developers just have lost all enthusiasm, and no one wants to interact with the community anymore. You look at what has happened.
From the FL side, you're
Yeah.
saying from the
Yeah.
ProgPow authorship.
You look at what has happened, and people are incredibly drained. I mean, I've been getting death threats. I've had large figures in the Ethereum community start harassing my businesses, start harassing my friends and business connections. I mean, that's not adult behavior. Hell, that's not sane mental behavior. I know that right now around the Ethereum DevCon, and by the time this is published, hopefully folks will have left. I've got numerous folks messaging me saying, hey, Bob Somerville's running around asking for private meetings to leak the scoop on ProgPow of how it was created. That's not sane mental behavior. I mean, that's not how it's supposed to go. When you propose a change to the Linux kernel, you don't suddenly get bombarded with people harassing you and attacking you saying, oh my God, what's your ulterior motive? Oh my God, what do you do for a living? What's your street address? Where do you live? How do you stand to financially gain from this? They just judge the code for what it is, the code. So it's very, very bizarre.
Yeah, and what you're saying, you know, you had brought this up earlier, multiple times it's been brought up, which is, you know, can you separate the author from the code?
Mm-hmm. And I think you have to. Like, I know that people are very focused on incentives in cryptocurrency, but if you strip all of that away, the reason ProgPow works is because it is custom built for Ethereum, nothing else. And Ethereum's economics and infrastructure are very unique. You can't use comparisons to Bitcoin, you can't use comparisons to Ethereum Classic. So if Ethereum is meant to be this world computer, you need to treat changes to the protocol no different to like you would with the Linux kernel. And you need to start looking at the code and analyzing the code and analyzing the effects on the code. Now, if you don't want to use ProgPow, that's fine. There's absolutely no need to use it, but then you don't need to go and harass the authors. People propose ideas all the time, and engineers especially want to fix problems.
Yeah.
For a person like me, there's a glaring problem in a hash. Oh, sorry.
That's fair to say that you don't want to be attacked for trying to work on something, to try to improve something. You know, with what you've kind of gone through, looking, you know, back in hindsight, would you have changed anything you did or said, or, you know, any of your activities?
I would not have been public at all. So a big thing with so why if DefElse was anonymous? We wanted to go with the whole Satoshi Nakamoto theme, where, you know, code should be judged for code. And DefElse actually asked me when we were proposing this. They were like, "Well, don't we just go out with our real identities?" And I was like, "No, that's not how the crypto community does. They prefer anonymity." And also, what ends up happening is if this change gets implemented, you start being harassed by quite a lot of people that are pro ASIC.
You knew this was going to happen.
For the pro ASIC part, I didn't realize that for all the other folks that have no interest in mining, this is going to happen. And so we were like, okay, let's remain anonymous. However, what happened was the DevCon meetup, DevCon 4. I was asked out of the blue, and I was 3 days into accepting my job at Core Scientific, because I remember having that email chain on the 26th. I was asked to speak at DevCon 4 about ProgPow. It came out of the blue. And some of the core devs said, hey, there's a lot of excitement about ProgPow. We'd love you to come speak about it. Now, this was particularly scary for two reasons. Number one, this was the first time that I had ever done a speaking event. Okay. So I was scared out of my mind. And number two, this made it pretty clear that I'd have to go more public. So I tied myself as, as Oh Got a Girl before to Miss If, but no one really knew who was behind Oh Got a Girl. It was largely, ignored. But the moment you go into a public arena and you start speaking, you kind of have to tie it all together. And also being a girl, I'm kind of recognizable. There's not many girls in mining right now. So the other reason was it helps lend some legitimacy. So people understand my background in mining. People understand my background with Genesis Mining, as well as with Core Scientific, as well as a consultant for a lot of ASIC design and development. So I have a lot of real world experience when it comes to building these devices.
But even with the fact that you lend the legitimacy, in retrospect, now you're saying, you know,
oh God, yeah, it's not worth it.
It not only it not only impacted your personal life, but it also impacted. I mean, do you think it's impacted the viability, the likelihood that ProgPow gets accepted?
I do, because people are so focused on the authors instead of the code and what it's trying to achieve. If you look at Lindsay, you know, the ASIC manufacturer of the new Ethereum ASICs, 90% of their arguments, all public and private, are all around the authors. That's it. You look at their Medium articles, it's all tying together. The most hilarious ones I love is Craig Wright somehow authoring this code. So Craig Wright is apparently the author of ProgPow. This is the new conspiracy theory. I just want to mention, by the way, that if someone with hardware engineering experience, if Craig Wright had hardware engineering experience, and if he really was Satoshi as he claims to be, he would not have created SHA-256 as the mining algorithm. So SHA-256 is terrible.
Is Craig Wright Satoshi?
Dude, I'm not going to comment on that. That is a loaded question, but we don't know who Satoshi is. And quite frankly, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
What Satoshi created is not what Bitcoin is today. It's like the furthest thing from it. And what has evolved is, you know, all the Bitcoin core developers have now taken up, you know, mantle or ownership of that name.
Yeah.
So
it's you know, I get it. You're in a tough spot sometimes with these things. Like, you know, like for me, I can easily like say even my opinion about something like the Craig Wright question, right? Like, because I don't have like business connection.
Well, here's the thing. I've spent a lot of time all over the world, meeting all the various parties involved in crypto for 10 years. I do believe Craig Wright was somehow involved, but that doesn't mean that he is Satoshi. So it's very important to understand that distinction. You can be involved in something, and this will bring us into the ProgPow piece. You can be involved in something, but that doesn't mean that, you know, that you created or that you were the author of something. What I do believe very firmly is Satoshi Nakamoto was a group, simply because the breadth of skills needed to pull that together is very important. I do firmly believe Dave was involved, Dave Kleinman. He holds a pretty special place in my heart because for people that were just getting into cryptography way back in the day, Dave was someone that would educate and teach people on IRC. He was always very willing, very open, very communicative. So I do believe Dave was, you know, a part of it early on. But, you know, at the end of the day, none of us know. And none of us can say, and it's really stupid to.
I don't know if it matters.
I don't think it does.
Part of me thinks that you know, it's best as a mystery as much.
I think so as well. I will say this: the N-chain offices. Most people keep thinking that, you know, what N-chain is doing is like it's just 5 dudes in like maybe a shed, but holy shit, dude, there are so many cryptographers and researchers there, and they're some of the most intelligent people that I've ever met. I was pretty amazed.
When we were going into this, you mentioned if Satoshi knew hardware, he would choose SHA-256, which I assume that implies that group probably didn't have a hardware person. Now,
yes.
Why is that? What's wrong with SHA-256?
So the original purpose of Bitcoin, if you just take the white paper and you ignore all the other noise, was 1 CPU, 1 vote. The problem was that when you're creating a cryptocurrency mining algorithm, it's about the distribution of wealth. And you need to ensure that your algorithm is correctly tuned and saturates hardware in such a way that regardless of which implementation or which hardware you use, it generates about the same amount of wealth for each unit. So you want to ensure that your algorithm generates, you know, ideally the same amount of coins on a CPU, a GPU, an FPGA, and an ASIC. Now, there's always going to be specializations available. And when I say sort of within, you're always going to have like a little less on the CPU, potentially a little more on the ASIC. But if you do have a hardware engineering background, you understand that there are ways to design algorithms that fully target hardware, and it makes it very difficult to make a ASIC with a massive speed up. So in SHA-256 case, it started out on CPUs. However, GPUs got 100x speed up. FPGAs got a 250x speed up, and then ASICs came in and just did 1000x to 3000x speed up. That's a massive gap. So you push out all the people that want to just join in with CPU mining. ProgPow was designed to actually level it out. So most people think ProgPow is about, oh, let's just hyper focus on GPUs. No, it's actually about, let's take ethash at its core. Let's not make sweeping changes to ethash, because it has some properties that are actually really beneficial, such as the growing DAG. Let's instead focus on tweaking the algorithm so that it fully targets its chosen ASIC, the GPU card, but that it can still run on a CPU if you want to. It can still run on an FPGA if you want to, and you can still build an ASIC for it, but there are not these massive differences. And that's in the original ProgPow white paper, which it seems no one who's speaking against it has ever read. So it actually goes through all the changes at ASIC resistance. The reason why ASIC resistance always fails is because you have people that are software engineers trying to make hardware-based algorithms. If you're going to do something on hardware, you need to understand how hardware works, how it's designed, what are some of the optimization tricks, and inherently how your zeros and ones translate onto the silicon. And so that's a big reason. Oh, go ahead.
I followed up with someone who wrote an article recently about ProgPow on Ethereum News, Alex Kyriakopoulos. He had said that he tried to reach out to you without comment, but one of his questions was, do you think IFDAFLs will continue working on these ASIC resistance kind of attack schemes, like, preventing ASIC resistance as it inevitably kind of moves towards?
Maybe a year ago, yeah, we actually wanted to. We actually did an implementation for Zcash. So around the time we proposed ProgPow, the Zcash competition was running on, and one of the early reviewers we had was one of the Zcash cryptographers, because really respected him and wanted his opinion. And so we got him to review the code, and then we decided to go ahead and do a Zcash implementation. They had a funding competition, and unfortunately, I let that completely slip. So I didn't monitor the communications. I didn't finish the protocol in time because I had a massive life change because I joined Core Scientific right midway through. I was like, oh well, shit, I have to drop everything now and focus on my company. But we actually did try to do that to ensure that, and this was a custom version of ProgPow that didn't have ethash, by the way. It was actually a tweak to Equihash. So it's following this sort of idea of you keep your base algorithm, Equihash, ethash, Raven, X16R, and you simply tweak it to really fully saturate or maximize the hardware.
So even if Ethereum doesn't take ProgPow, another, like, this is out there, a coin could end up adopting it.
A few coins have, a few smaller coins. I always caution over sharing algorithms because it actually weakens a chain. That's a problem in both ASICs and GPUs. Why it weakens a chain is if you have one coin that wants to be ASIC resistant and one coin that wants to be ASIC pro, and they share an algorithm, an ASIC is going to be created. And then if one of those coins changes their algorithm, the other chain is stuck with, the ASIC. It's always cleaner and better just to have the one algorithm. For a GPU miner and for a GPU user, it doesn't matter. Same for the FPGA side, because they can always make their own bit streams or their own kernels.
And which coins are currently using it, you mentioned?
So there's a few. There's one called Bitcoin Interest, the most common one. They were the first adopters of ProgPow. There's another one called, I think it was Bitcoin Gold. No, not Bitcoin Gold. Bitcoin New York.
Wow.
There's a lot of shit coins. Yeah, there's like there's like 250 different coins called Bitcoin something something. So, and I see it popping up all the time. I don't
Okay, so it's the
actually,
experimental layer. It's not the
yes, I would be very cautious about whether or not it's ASIC resistant, because what I actually don't know like what they've forked or what they've implemented, because what we've done is we've written a white paper, we've done an EIP, and then we've created a reference miner and a reference implementation for Geth, the C++ Ethereum client, and a few others. I don't actually know what they're using. Like, I haven't investigated, so full transparency, I
yeah,
haven't been a part of any of those
at your own
projects.
caution there.
Yeah.
But it's great that it's out there. People can try it. And I know that it's already passed 2 audits. Is that the recent count? I know Least Authority
Correct.
did one.
And Bob Rao. So Bob Rao is like, um, Bob Rao is like my hero. He's legendary at Intel. For people to understand like a little bit about who Bob Rao is, he helped redesign a lot of the supply chain and the silicon yields. And he does a lot of optimization tricks on silicon yield at Intel. And he's heavily involved in the silicon side of things. So he's like one of my biggest heroes. He's an Intel technical fellow. He's like very, very senior. I think he's retired now. He's like the Gandalf of
how
hardware
much
engineering.
yielding can you get off of silicon? I mean, after a while, you've yielded it to death.
Well, it's more about when you're creating a chip from a wafer. So think of a wafer as, you know, a giant disk. And what happens is it's split up into a grid, and not all the chips on that grid are functioning or valid or within quality control parameters. Tuning for yield is about how do you ensure that a majority of that wafer is used up for optimal for within the quality control parameters. Now, that is a very difficult problem. There's also a lot of myths that I was very surprised that people parrot, including the ASIC manufacturers within the cryptocurrency community. So there's this big common misconception that yield is very bad. It's very bad for ASIC chips because ASIC chips require very high frequency at a very low voltage. But for GPUs, no problem at all. Most GPUs have consistent anywhere from 98 to 99% yield, which is almost perfect. GPUs have never had a problem with yield, but there are billion-dollar companies behind it that, you know, have perfected this art and have a lot of resources.
Yeah, and
different.
the learning curve on this is, I mean, I feel like happy knowing what I know about proof of work. When you start getting into silicon yield, you know, I yield and, you know, I concede.
But see, all that's very important for understanding ProgPow and how it works.
And that's why we have audits, right? Where, you know, hey, I can't do this. I'm going to let somebody else do it. You know, like I'm not somebody that can go and say this code is good or bad. I'm really going to rely on other people to do that. I know that 2 of the arguments today against ProgPow that I hear are the one being, you know, that the audits aren't sufficient. Is there any more rigorous audit that's possible at this point? Or is it just people asking for, you know?
The audits are sufficient. So specifically what needed to be done is someone needed to check the code. So the software portion of it, that was Least Authority. Look for any weaknesses, backdoors, and Least Authority actually did both the Zcash audit as well as the @hash audit. So they have a history of doing audits on proof of work algorithms. And they were one of the original folks that actually pointed out some of the vulnerabilities and weakness in @hash.
So is there anyone like that's been proposed to do an audit as a counter, like saying, hey, if XYZ does an audit, okay, we'll concede, the code is great. Like, has anything been proposed to you that like, hey, we'll stop saying that there's an issue with the code if you do this?
Well, that was the whole point of doing the audits. The community,
I understand
the community, yeah.
Those 2 have been done. As you know, it sounds
and all
like
of the community members have been satisfied. Now they've turned their focus to, oh my God, the authors. What if Craig Wright wrote the code?
Which brings up the other problem that Bob has brought up a lot, which is the IP area.
So there's no problem with that. Let me explain why. And, you know, legal advice has been given in a "this is not legal advice" fashion on Twitter by lawyers, but let me explain why. And it's frustrating to me. Bob doesn't understand how software IP works, given he was director of engineering at EA, so he claims. So fundamentally, ProgPow is a tweak to ethash, which is already licensed and open source and out there in the public. It's been 1 year, so it can't have any patents on it. You can file a non-provisional for anything, and it holds for a year. But then you have to file a provisional, and then it's searchable, and then it becomes a matter of public record. Go search today, you're going to find nothing on ProgPow. And community, please do not go and start patenting ProgPow. It's bad.
I mean, that would probably put a nail in the coffin, right? If somebody just
even if someone does patent it, what's the problem? What can they do? Think really hard about that. What is someone going to accomplish? Number one, they have to prove that they created it. Number two, what are they possibly going to accomplish? Because ProgPow is licensed under CCIO. It's an idea. It's written. It's not even code at this point. It's written text in an EIP, so that's under CC 0, Creative Commons. Then you have the implementations. One is in a miner, which is under GPL v3. Okay, so you've just forced it to always be open source. There's no way to take it and patent that or claim it as your own. Then the second one is the implementations in things like Deth or the C++ client are under their own licenses. In that case, Apache 2.0 or MIT or GPL. So you've got all these different licenses that branch all over, basically ensuring that if you authored if ProgPow was created and implemented, no one can patent it, no one can rescind copyright, no one can go, oh my God, this is mine now. That doesn't work. So now have a think about
this is all the stuff you've learned in like, I mean, you didn't have to know any of this. Like,
this is all stuff I learned at Core Scientific. So there's an important change that happened between when I wrote ProgPow and when and today, which is I became CTO of Core Scientific. And I had the pleasure of studying under Kevin Turner, the Chief Operating Officer of Microsoft, Bill Humes, the CFO of Ingram Micro, a massive billion-dollar manufacturing division. I served under, I got to partner with some of the most brilliant minds in the entire world. And I got a crash course education in how do you actually grow a software company and a hardware company.
I'm going to have to, honestly, you just said all that stuff. I'm going to have to rewatch to understand all the IP and really, if there's, this is where I like to capture things, right? So it's like, look, this is your argument on why this doesn't make sense. Mm-hmm. It makes sense for somebody to somehow explain why that's not valid.
Yeah.
I'm not someone who can do that,
So for the audience, the big reason Bob is so vocal about this is because apparently, and this was before my time, so apparently there was an issue where there was a C++ implementation and Gavin Woods, I think it was, claimed copyright over it, and that drove Bob to depression, apparently, or suicide. I don't really know about this.
There's a precedent in his concern on the IP side.
However, no, that was a completely different thing. That was Gavin probably did choose his own license for that algorithm. Which probably wasn't GPL or MIT. And, there was probably a whole host of other things in that space. Like, you can't compare the two areas. Now, that Bob's other biggest concern is, I said that 40 people over the course of ProgPow, since it has come public, have worked on it. And this is true. There have been many different community feedback, reviews, testing, that have all contributed. Bob somehow conflated that with, oh my God, there are 40 authors. So you have all these people that have contributed to ProgPow in some way, both negatively and positively. Some people like Andrea Lafranche, who actually tweaked the GPU miner, have contributed code that's GPL. You've got some people like CH Powell from the Ethereum Foundation that have helped implement it into standard F miner. You have people that have helped with the testing and verification and validity. I don't know any of their names. But holy shit, am I thankful for them, because
there's a lot of people. What's the concern that there's a lot of people?
So Bob wants all of these people to sign a document that says they will not claim ownership over the code. Now, you just can't feasibly do that. And quite frankly, that goes against cryptocurrency. We are all here today because a bunch of anonymous authors or an anonymous author wrote the damn code and put it out in the ecosystem and said, hey, go use it. Do you think that there is what Bob once signed? I think it's called a CLA. Do you think there's one of that for every single Linux kernel author? God, no. People contribute code all the time simply because they anonymously. This is a founding principle of open software development.
That's more of a request because of concerns from a lot of, like, it doesn't sound like that's the modus operandi for cryptocurrency.
It's not.
And you know,
and it stifles things. It does stifle things. So look at all the backlash that I've faced, and that you know, if Def Else as a group has faced. Now think about, there's a world of very talented people that are watching ProgPow closely, and they're saying, you know what, this is why I won't get involved with cryptocurrency development. You've just pushed out all of this crap that how people are acting over ProgPow has just pushed out a world of talent that no one longer wants to interact with the general community.
Yeah.
So you've pushed out folks like
a lot of money is involved in this. I understand that, whichever way this falls. You know, from my understanding, who benefits the most if ProgPow doesn't pass?
The ASIC manufacturers, specifically anyone that's so we know of. Now publicly, there are 5 different ASIC manufacturers building ASICs. I'll also briefly highlight while it's on my brain. A lot of people say GPU manufacturing isn't decentralized because they say, oh, there's only 2 chip providers. Well, let me just break that down. No, there's not. No, sorry, there's only 2 GPU manufacturers. No, there's not. NVIDIA and AMD build chips. Chips are usually only built by 1 or 2 companies at the max because there's a lot of specialization that goes into this. Right. This is the same for cryptocurrency as well. ASIC manufacturers copy from each other. Right. And
it's just the size of the company. It's just the fact that the NVIDIA and AMDs of the world are a lot bigger than the biggest crypto chip maker.
Correct.
But you're right. There's only 2 on either side. The pockets are bigger.
Then there's board makers. So how custom GPU mining cards came to be is the board makers actually created them. So for NVIDIA cards, there's over 80 of them. And for AMD, there's over, I think, 65 of them. Making GPU PCBs is a specialty field that actually NVIDIA and AMD don't go into themselves. They always create their, you know, the first, they call them the anniversary products or the flagship products. That's like a locked-in custom run of a GTX 1080 first release edition. And you can buy it and then there's no more. And then it gets outsourced to what they call AIBs and AICs. The same thing happens with FPGAs. There's only 2 makers, Intel and Xilinx. And then they outsource board development to other people. So this is a very important distinction. GPU mining actually has way more supply lines to choose from that are global. GPUs are distributed globally. We get to ASICs, you only have a cluster of companies that sit in China. And they all make, what they do is they focus on building the chips. So for Ethereum right now, we have Bitmain that is produced in E3 and then also has an unreleased Ethereum ASIC. You have Canaan, which is just announced their ASIC, which is, I think it was 6.7x more efficient than a GPU. You have Lindsay, that's also making their ASIC or has made their ASIC. You have InnoSilicon, that's made their ASIC. And then you have these other little mom and pop shops that come up within China. And they advertise that they're creating ASICs, but what they're actually creating is FPGAs and ASIC boxes. This is a big thing. This is what hit Ravencoin. So Ravencoin believes that they were hit by ASICs. They were actually hit by things called FPGAs, specifically speed core FPGAs, and they were crammed into ASIC boxes. It's a new trend I've noticed because an ASIC box is actually a very beautiful design that allows for some really cool, efficient cooling. So fun fact of the day.
And it was easy to put the FPGA in.
It was. So they actually create custom boards to slide into the ASIC boxes, and then it gets disguised like a cryptocurrency ASIC. And it's kind of like everyone's very familiar with associating ASICs with cryptocurrency mining for other coins. So it's just sort of like a little marketing thing. I thought it was actually pretty neat. The reason why that's really bad though is not just for the ecosystem. So when I wrote something called The Problem of Proof of Work. It was an article just after ProgPow it came out. I have a few follow-up articles coming out soon now as well. During 2017, I got a crash course in how shady and dark the Chinese hardware market actually is. This was at the height of the Ethereum mining boom. I watched people flip memory chips, steal memory chips, and do whatever it took to basically hoard memory chips. And this was because cryptocurrency mining, as well as demanding pressure from video game console makers, phones, etc., skyrocketed the price of GDDR5 memory and DRAM and all other sorts of memory. And what happened was the memory manufacturers looked at this surge of new customers buying their chips, and they realized, hang on, we can sell chips over here for, they used to be like 30 cents. We can sell them over here for $7 to this GPU miner. Why don't we just sell them at $7 to everyone else? And so there was this massive increase in pressure in 2017 on memory pricing, which was why GPU card prices suddenly skyrocketed. It had nothing to do with people were just, buying lots of GPUs. It had everything to do with damn memory, and it caused a lot of pain and pressure. What happened in 2017 was Bitmain was also starting to hoard memory. Bitmain was hoarding memory in bulk, and they were actually going to GPU manufacturers and paying a premium to get any memory they could, and they were just stocking up. Now, when I say Bitmain, I'm very careful now after having worked with them professionally at Core Scientific, because what I learned is that there are divisions within Bitmain at that time that just did whatever they wanted to. Chinese companies are very complex in that they have lots of factions. Canaan is also this way. There's sort of like 3 factions within Canaan that just do whatever they want. It's a little weird for us to comprehend in the Western world because, ideally you have a CEO that's sort of the boss, right? That doesn't really work in China. It's very complex. And anyway, we saw that Bitmain had just started hoarding memory. And what they were doing was they were actually buying GPU cards themselves. And then they were hoarding whatever they could, whatever excess silicon they could to keep producing Ethereum ASICs. Because what they wanted to do was basically push out as much of their excess silicon and as much of this memory as possible into the market to push out GPU manufacturers. There's something else, while it's on my head, most people don't realize. In China, there's this mentality of you want to become vertically integrated. So in the Western world, you think a company like Microsoft, they'd never go produce their own GPU card, right? It just seems really sort of stupid. They'd instead go and work or partner with NVIDIA or AMD. And, you form partnerships in the Western world, very tight partnerships. That doesn't really happen in China. So what ends up happening is these ASIC companies have started to become vertically integrated where they want to produce their own GPUs, their own FPGA cards. Bitmain's was starting to do that in 2017, and they've made a lot of progress. I think in a few coming weeks, we're going to see them, in a few coming months, we're going to start seeing them unveil their own GPU cards and their own FPGAs. China mentality is become vertically integrated and keep everything for China.
There are so many different players in this space. And I mean, just listening to
it's complex.
How complex it is. When I bring up the question of trying to understand who benefits on each side, one of the things I'm trying to understand, and I have an inkling, but I need to, I want to clarify it, is who has the deeper pockets? Is it the person who's trying to see ProgPow defeated, or is it the person supporting ProgPow?
So ASIC manufacturers will benefit the most if it doesn't go through because their investment is safe. Then you'll have people that understand the exploits within EdHash that will also benefit quite highly. Now, this is a recent one. There's the ability to completely bypass the DAG the thing that makes Ethereum so special, and basically bypass the memory bandwidth or memory hardness portion of at hash. It's
No,
a massive
I
vulnerability.
don't want.
So
I don't
those
want
people will benefit, and if it gets implemented,
into the technicals.
Well, that it's important to understand, because the knowledge of that is not very well known. So those two parties benefit. If it does get implemented, there's this myth that only GPU manufacturers will benefit. Well, no, that's not true. All of a sudden, anyone that creates hardware will benefit. So you can still create an ASIC for ProgPow. I've always said that. It's just not going to be massively efficient.
No, I also know that mining pools. You know, I interviewed Gleb from Two Brothers Mining Pool, and it seems that mining pools, at least the smaller ones, will benefit from ProgPow going forward, because there's going to be a change in algorithms. And whenever that happens, people actually have to update their settings on their mining rigs. It's the opportunity they have to switch over to a different mining pool.
Cool.
So apparently, you know, large budgets in marketing have been prepared to do this blitz, but that only happens if ProgPow goes through.
That's pretty cool. I didn't think of that. So that's also an opportunity to further decentralize mining, since right now another centralization problem in mining is the concentration of mining pools. There's most people who get into mining still believe everything they read on the internet, which is miners create blocks. No, that doesn't happen. Pools create blocks. Pools are your authority. What a pool does is it collects all the work, creates the block, and then sends out a request to a bunch of devices to go and fill in the missing nodes. Pools are a very scary force right now. Work's being done on the Bitcoin side to decentralize this. Haven't seen anything on the Ethereum side. Work's being done on the Monero side to further decentralize this. But yeah, that's pretty cool. I didn't realize that.
It's great. You know, I love having the show because I get to learn stuff, and then I get to pass it on like you.
Very cool.
So I want to close up by asking two more questions. One is, where do you stand on the DAO fork? You know, do you think that code is law is the #1 priority that doesn't change no matter what? Or do you think there are certain instances where, you know, things supersede code is law?
So the DAO fork was a little before my time, because I wasn't heavily involved in the Ethereum protocol piece. But I do believe code is law. I do believe code should be judged by code. The piece that I would caution is Ethereum never had a proper audit. Like there should have been the DAO never had a proper audit. There should have been an audit that caught that, quite honestly, because that should have been done before any money was put into the DAO. I do believe that, and maybe this is going to get me a lot of backlash, but you know, I do believe that what Ethereum did was right. I don't think that there should have been a fork to benefit the hacker, but so we have what we have.
Crumbled.
Hey, this is the beauty of crypto, right? If you have a different opinion, you can just fork the chain.
No, and like at the end of the day, you know, I always remind people that we're all kind of on the same team somewhat, you know, and to not kind of get too, vicious, you know, because there are people that are completely on the other side of the field from us. So the final question, and this has been fantastic. I've learned so much. Thank you so much for your time. I want to continuously get perspectives and have more, amazing guests. Who would you recommend that is another amazing female, persona in crypto for me to bring on the show?
So I think you should talk to Manasi Vora. She's the head of product strategy at Nebulous. Nebulous created Sia Coin. And right now they've been making a massive buzz, especially since they just got listed on Kraken, I believe it was.
That's awesome. I love it. So we're gonna get Manasi then for the next interview. And Kristy, thank you so much. This has been amazing.
Thank you for having me. Sorry for rambling.
No. You know what? That's the only way we get everything out there. You know, I saw you had a great interview with what was it, POV or
Yep, POV Crypto.
The other day. So I'll link that as well. And if there's anything else you want me to link in the YouTube, let me know. And that's a wrap.